Donc aujourd'hui, c'est notre grand plaisir d'avoir Marc Chaussidon comme premier orateur. C'est une petite tradition de l'Institut de physique du globe. Marc a bien accepté de le faire, d'avoir les directeurs qui présentent les premiers séminaires. Je pense que c'est un piège, parce que nous voulons voir si les directeurs n'est pas phagocyté complètement par les tâches administratives. Non, c'est une blague. Donc, à part ça, donc Marc, c'est inutile de le présenter. Il a reçu son doctorat à l'Institut national polytechnique de Lorraine. Ensuite, il a été embauché pratiquement tout de suite au CNRS. Il a travaillé à Nancy pour plusieurs années avant de devenir directeur, devenir à l'IPG et être directeur. Il a de nombreuses distinctions, honors, awards, des articles, etc. Et donc, je pense que j'ai tout dit. Après les séminaires aussi comme tradition, il y aura les buffets pour permettre la discussion avec Marc qui va nous parler de Cosmochemical Astrophysical.
Et je vais le faire en mauvais anglais pour voilà. And in fact, the major reason why I give the first one is because nobody wanted to do it, so the slot was free. Okay? In the last 10, 20 years, there has been a lot of progress in two different fields, in fact, which studies the same thing, which is cosmochemistry, which studies from chemistry, isotopic chemistry, the early times of the solar system, and from astrophysics. And specifically the study of the young stars, young stellar objects, which can be analogous to our sun, their accretion disk, and the formation of planets in this disk. And these two, in fact, fields have undergone a lot of progress, which make that, in fact, today, astrophysicists and cosmochemists can talk together and can study the same thing, in fact, with perhaps the same kind of resolution, except that cosmochemist studies the solar system and the astrophysicist studies extrasolar system or model the solar system. And so, but in fact, when you look to papers, there are very few studies which try to really combine together what is known from astrophysics and what is known from cosmochemistry. And so this was the reason of the project that we developed and we submitted to ENA in 2015, so which is named CRADL. This is the acronym. And so which group people from IPGP, people from the Museum of National History in Paris on the other side of the garden, and people in the ENS in Lyon. And today I will more specifically show results made by Zhengbing Deng, Francesco Pignatal, Frédéric Monnier, Christa, Sébastien Charnoz, and myself. What the cosmochemists have in hand to study the solar system are some samples. So we are geologists, and these samples are chondrites. And so you all know chondrites. Chondrites are, but I make a very small recap on what chondrites are. So chondrites are primitive. So primitive meaning that they are not differentiated. So they are primitive meteorites. Non-differentiated meaning that they have not been submitted to metal-silicate differentiation or silicate-silicate differentiation. They have not undergone melting. And they are understood as being fragments of planetesimals, some objects, small objects of 100, 1,000 kilometer size that populated the solar accretion disk a few million years after the start of the solar system. And this is the first confusion often made with chondrites. So chondrites are primitive, but primitive doesn't mean that they are very old. In fact, they are the youngest meteorites. They are primitive because they accreted late in the history of the accretion disk when aluminium-26 was extinct, and so there was no radioactive heat source for their differentiation, and this is the reason why they are not differentiated. And so in fact, there are sediments which accreted in the solar accretion disk from all the kind of dust and solids which were there. So there are some way to sample the solids which were in the disk when the disk was something like 2, 3, 4, 5 million years old. They are made as shown in this picture. This is a thin section made in transmitted light of a meteorite. You see these big objects, round objects, which are chondrules. The size is, let's say, 100 micrometer. So these are making, depending on the chondrite types, but in some chondrites they are making up to 70 or 80% of the mass of the object. They are silicate spherule. We are going to see them in more detail after that, which contain some glass. So they have been melted at high temperature and they have been quenched in the gas, in the disk. And they were made by melting of pre-existing solids. And we know that because in some of them we have relict grains which have not been totally melted. Chondrites also contain what we call CAIs, so calcium for calcium aluminum rich inclusions, which are refractory objects which are understood as being made by condensation at high temperature from the gas of the disk, which was at high temperature. They are generally taken as the proof of the condensation at high temperature from the gas. And they are the first solid which would condensate from this gas at high temperature because they are the more refractory. And so they are, by that argument, they are the oldest solids which were made in the disk. And you will see that also by dating, we show that they are the oldest one. And these two components are embedded into with a matrix, which is in black here because it is opaque, and it is made of fragments of chondrules, of CIs, and of many other minerals of very small size. And this matrix is rich in water and in minerals which are stable at lower temperature. So this is a chondrite. And chondrites, of course, are very famous because one of type of chondrite, there are different types of chondrite, but the carbonaceous chondrites, Orgueil, so which are named CI, and that you can see on the left. So this is a picture of one specimen which you can see in the exposition at the Grand Gallery on meteorites, which is going on at the moment. And so this chondrite has the chemical composition of the sun. So this is shown on the right, where you see so the line is a slope 1, and you have the composition of the sun in y-axis and the composition of the chondrite on the x-axis. And you can see that for all elements, except, of course, gaseous element, hydrogen, which makes 95% of the solar system. So chondrite is a rock, so there is not so much gas in it. But for all the elements, the chondrite has exactly the composition of the sun. And this is a very strong observation, but in fact, an observation which is not so well understood, and in fact not at all understood, and which can lead to very wrong interpretation, in fact, if we miss the basic constraint from basic astrophysics. And I will give two examples to explain that. The first one is that the common idea is to say that chondrites are made from the accretion of solids which were condensed from the solar nebula. And this is the story of the condensation sequence. And the idea is that to make an object which has exactly the same composition than the gas, it's simple. You just have to condense all the gas into solid. So you take the gas at high temperature, you cool it, and you condense all the minerals, and you put all the elements into the minerals, and you put this mineral together, and you have a solid which has the same composition as the gas. So we'll see that it is much more complicated than that. And this will be the topic of the talk. Okay? Another complication and wrong interpretation would be to say that because chondrites have the same composition than the sun, and because the sun is making all the mass, nearly all the mass of the solar system, planets must have the composition of chondrites also. And chondrites are generally taken as a benchmark for discussing the chemical composition of planets. But also this is of course a very strong observation that planets, that the Earth, for instance, has, and we will see from isotopic constraint, and Marc Javois has worked on that a lot, have nearly exactly the isotopic composition of one type of chondrite, which are unstatite chondrite, and Marc has shown how, and Edouard have shown how you can make the Earth from an object which has this composition. So this is perfectly true, but we know that from astrophysics that the Earth and Mars are not made from chondrite. They are not made from chondrite. The way planets are made, it's shown here. Okay, so it's starting from the gas. You have to condense the gas, make some nanometer, micrometer size solids. These solids will accrete together to form some agglomerate, and then they will overcome the meta barrier and make planetesimals of, let's say, 1,000 kilometers, and the planetesimal will grow by a runaway growth. The bigger planetesimal will attract by the gravity small object around them, and they will grow to make this runaway growth. And then when we have big bodies, embryos, they will, in fact, because of their mass, perturb the orbits of objects around them and prevent further accretion, and further accretion will go by chaotic growth to make a big collision and planets. And so the Earth is made, dating of the Earth shows that the Earth is probably made between 30 or 150 million years after the start of the solar system. It's made from differentiated embryo. It's not made from chondrite. And Mars is not made from chondrite. Mars is made very early. Mars is an embryo. Dating using hafnium tungsten shows that the Mars has got 50% of its mass and has already differentiated a core, something like nearly 2 million years after the start of the solar system. And chondrites contain chondrules, which have ages of 4 or 5 million years. So chondrites are late. Chondrites did not exist when Mars was formed. So the Earth and Mars are not made from chondrite. And when you look to simulation, this is very clear also. So this is an example of simulation. So I played the movie on one side. So you see here, you have on the right, you have a simulation which will show, okay, here you have a population. You will start with planetesimals, which are here. They have different colors. So these ones are red because they are hot, so they contain no water. These ones are below the ice limit in the solar system between around Mars, after Mars. So they are blue because they contain water. This simulation is made to try to explain how water can be in the Earth, because the Earth is made at a position in the solar system where water is vapor and cannot be ice. So it's difficult to understand how you can accrete water, because you have to have water on the solid form to make it in the Earth. And so the idea, this simulation is showing that when you start with that, okay, the planetesimals are excited, and you have some mixing, and you will see that there will be embryo which will grow, and at the end, this simulation has been chosen because it works, okay, and at the end, it will give a planet here at the position of the Earth, and you will see that at the end of the accretion, it will become blue, because there will be some objects coming from the outer solar system, bringing water to the Earth. And this is shown also here, where you see the accretion, the formation of a planet like the Earth. So this is time, 50 million years, 100 million years, and this is a fraction of mass. And you see that in the simulation, there are some of them, like the blue here, the light blue, which terminates by a collision with a large body. So when the pre-Earth was already 80% of its mass, and if this large body is bringing water, okay, this body can make the moon, the collision can make the moon, but it can also bring water to the system and water to the Earth. And if we continue, there are other kinds of simulation, taking into account what has been observed in extrasolar systems, which is the major result of the observation of extrasolar planets, which is that planets undergo migration during the very early time of the formation of the stellar system. And if you take into account migration of the giant planets, this simulation has here Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. And if you take into account the migration of the giant planets here, because they interact with the gas in the disk, so at the very early time of the disk, when the gas was still in the disk, they will perturb all the disk, and they will, in fact, destroy the distribution of planetesimals in the disk, and you will see that they excite the planetesimal, and in fact, at the end, they make that a lot of planetesimals are lost to the sun, and in fact, that you just terminate with a concentration of planetesimals here, which correspond to the asteroidal belt today. This also explains why Mars is small and did not terminate as a big planet. And it shows also that the composition of this planetesimal is the result of a mixing between different objects. So this is not the subject of the talk, but I think this is very a good example to show how for instance, if you say, okay, the Earth has a chondritic composition, when you say that, behind, the physics tells you that to make a chondritic composition is complicated, okay? And in fact, it is not really well understood, because it's a fact that the Earth has a composition of unstatile chondrite, and to make this composition is complicated. So, and when you when you think to that, in fact, when we discussed and we on this project at the beginning to write it, in fact, it goes back to what makes the composition of chondrites. And what is the chondritic composition? What makes a chondritic composition? And in fact, when we say that chondrites have the composition of the sun, it's not even true. Chondrites do not have the composition of the sun because they have chondritic composition for chemical elements. But when you look to isotopes, they don't have the composition of the sun. And this is true for oxygen. Oxygen is 50% of the mass of silicates. And when you look to oxygen isotopes, and so I will come back to this diagram later on, so I do not explain it in details now, but here you have the oxygen isotopic composition, the 3 oxygen isotopes. Here it is the 18:16 ratio. This is the 17:16 ratio. And okay, it's just so from what we know, what we have done on the isotopic composition of solar wind implanted in lunar soils, the fantastic work that Kevin McKeegan has done by analyzing the solar wind trapped in the Genesis collector from this NASA mission, we know that the sun is here, okay, and the sun contains 5% more oxygen 16 than the Earth and than chondrites, which are here, okay. And so this line here, it's impossible to go from here to here by process that we know. And this demonstrates that the chondrites and the sun are made from oxygen, which is not the same. So it's different reservoir. So even if they appear to have the same chemical composition grossly, because there are some variations in magnesium-silicon ratio, aluminum-silicon ratio between chondrites and the sun, even though they appear to have the same chemical composition, in fact, they are not made from the same reservoir. There has been something in between the gas of the sun and the formation of these chondrites. And this is really the question that we try to address, okay? My introduction is quite long, okay, before going to results, but it's to try to show you the question. And in fact, when you think to that, when you read papers, most papers which discuss this problem consider the condensation, the condensation of the solar gas. Okay, so they try to see how you can condense solids of different composition from a gas of solar composition, because the sun has a solar composition by definition. And so, and they try to vary the thermodynamics, so the temperature, the pressure, to see if the redox, to see whether you can change the composition of the solids which are made. But for us, the major question is not that. The first question is to try to understand how you can make a solar composition. Because when you look to the interstellar medium, so when you look to the interstellar medium, so in the interstellar medium, so from where the solar system is coming, all the elements of the interstellar medium is a mix of gas and solids. And you can see these columns of dust here. This is a very well-known picture, and the gas in between, which is ionized and has these colors. And what we know from a spectroscopy of this gas, so this is shown in this diagram. So this is a measurement by spectroscopy of the concentration of the elements in the gas versus their condensation temperature. This is normalized to the sun, the solar composition, so 0, it's in log units. So 0 means that you find in the gas the same composition, the same concentration that you find in the sun. And what you see is that the gas has the composition of the sun only for the volatile elements, the ones which are condensed at low temperature. And the ones which are condensed at high temperature, let's say, I don't know, calcium, silicon, in fact, they are not in the gas. And why they are not in the gas? Simply because they are in the grains. So when you make the solar system, you have a mix of gas and solids, but all the chemical elements, the major elements which make the planet, they are not in the gas, they are in solids. So if you want to make a gas of solar composition, the first question you have to solve is first to try to see how you can vaporize these grains to make a gas of solar composition. And to try to understand that, you have to think of what is the physics when a disk and the solar system is made. And this is well known from observation of young stars. So this is the sketch of what people think is the evolution to make a stellar system and our solar system. So these drawings are coming from observation. We'll see some pictures in the next slide. And the first star is the infall. So we start from a molecular cloud, which is at equilibrium between gravity and dilatation due to its temperature, and then if you have some instability, gravity will win over, and then the gas part of this cloud will collapse to its center of mass. So at the beginning, there is some kind of spherical geometry, and within this geometry, material is gas and dust are collapsing toward the center, trying to make a concentration at the center, which will be the growing star. Then, by definition, we define a second stage, which is when more than half of the material is not anymore in the cloud with a spherical geometry, but is within the disk, and you still have 50% of the material, more or less, which is in the gas, in the cloud around, still in falling. Then the gas around has disappeared, and you only have the disk. At this time, the star is more visible, and we see that it is emitting a huge amount of X-rays. It is very active, and so it is named as a T-Tauri star. And then the star is growing, its activity is decreasing, and then it ends with only the planets, the sun and the planets, and the disk has disappeared because most of the material in the disk has been consumed by the formation of the sun, and also dissipated by the stellar winds, the solar winds, which is emitted by the star. Observation of hundreds or nearly thousands of stars, young stars like that, allow to make some statistics, and you can date this object, and this is the time scale to which you come. Okay? And these different stages last at maximum for something like 10 million years, and the first one are very short, okay? 100,000 years, 0.5 million years. So this is the scale. And if you think to that, if you think to your grains, how your grains and your gas will be transformed to try to form a solar gas of a solar composition, this is the different steps, okay, you have to think to. So you start from a nebular gas, okay, here you have some pictures of young stars. So this one is very classical, so the star is here, just below the green dot, okay. This is the two jets which are perpendicular to the disk. This is the disk here, which is black, so the light of the star is not visible because of the dust, okay. And you see this disk here, okay. After that, if you can blow up, okay, you see the star here is isolated in its region of formation. So here it is illuminated by UV of massive stars around here. So the disk is here, you can see it, okay. And then after that, different steps. Here you have a picture of a more evolved stage where you see what we call a protoplanetary disk. It's still an accretion disk, but it's also a protoplanetary disk because the planets are developing in it, and you see planets are carving gaps into the disk, and you see them being formed. So the work we are doing, okay, is to try to understand that. So how we start from the pre-solar cloud with gas and dust, and what's going to happen during the formation of the solar system. And so this gas will undergo photochemical reaction because it's illuminated by UV light from the forming sun. It will undergo nuclear reaction, collision between high energy protons emitted by the sun, forming sun, and the gas. It will be heated to very high temperature. The dust, part of the dust will be heated also, so will be vaporized, so we'll go to the dust and modify the composition of the gas, sorry. Part of the dust will just be heated but not vaporized, so it will react with the gas, and part will undergo solid state transformation. Part of the dust will be injected in the disk at a position where it is not going to high temperature, and so will be preserved and will go in the disk without being heated too much. And so from the gas at high temperature, when the gas, we are going to see that, dissipates by going outwards, it will condensate some minerals. Some condensate can be reheated, can be processed. Some of the dust from pre-solar dust can be processed, and some of the dust can be preserved. And this is from this mix of solids that you make the chondrite. And this is not clear at all, is how you make a chondritic composition from that. So this is the end of the introduction, the very last one, before the start of I'm going to show you some results. But so chondrites are made from these different types of solid. We see them in chondrites, okay? This is a very classical pictures of, this is a pre-solar grain, a silicon carbide, so it has been condensed in the envelope of a star and formed millions or hundreds of millions of years before the formation of the solar system. It is dust in the interstellar medium. This is what is called GEM, so glass with embedded metal and sulfides. So this is made of amorphous silicates, which are Mg rich, with metal and sulfides. This is understood as grains silicate grain, silicate dust from the interstellar medium, which is amorphous by the interaction with high energy proton in the interstellar medium. So the silicates are not crystalline anymore. So this is found in meteorites, so it has been preserved. It is silicate dust which has been preserved, okay, because it's still amorphous. This is condensate, so this is typical CI, where you see condensate, high temperature mineral, calcium aluminum rich. This is chondrules, okay, we are going to see that, which has been melted in the disk. And so the question is, when did these solids form? How they interact with the gas, and how from that, at the end, they build chondrites. And to try to explain that, to find out that, we use two kinds of tools, okay? First one, we try to extract the information from the components of chondrites by using, I'm going to show you some examples by studying short-lived radioactive nuclides like aluminum-26, oxygen isotopes. And we try to do numerical simulation to track the formation, transformation of these solids in the disk. And the result will be, you'll see that all the major ingredients of chondrites are made very early in the disk and then are associated together to form chondrites. So now I have finished the introduction, and I hope you are convinced that there are questions that we don't know the answer to. And so what I'm going to show you is some example of results. So we are going to go, and it will be very just snapshot, okay, just to give you a flavor of what we are doing. So aluminum-26, magnesium oxygen isotopes, and the numerical simulation of the disk at the end. So I start with aluminum-26, so I don't want to spend time too much on it. You know all that, so you know that you can date object by radioactivity. With short-lived radioactive nuclide like aluminum-26, which has a half-life of 0.7 million years, the systematics is like that. Okay, if you make different spots in a CI, for instance, it will form an isochrone in such a diagram, which shows the excess of magnesium-26 due to the radioactive decay of aluminum-26. So this is the y-axis versus the aluminum-magnesium content. If there is today a lot of aluminum-27 in this object, it means, if you have this line, that there was associated with aluminum-27, aluminum-26. This aluminum-26 has decayed and is making an excess of magnesium-26, and this is the reason of this line. If you write mass balance, the slope can be related, give you the isotopic ratio of aluminum at the time of formation of this object. This can be related by the law of radioactive decay to the aluminum isotopic ratio at the start of the solar system at time 0 that we have to define. But you also have another information of time, which is the initial value, the intercept here, which is the initial composition of the magnesium isotopes at the time of formation of this object. And with time, in the disk, aluminum-26 is also decaying in the gas, and so is producing radioactive magnesium in the gas, some excess of magnesium-26, and if you form an object late, it will be made with a magnesium isotopic composition, which is not the original one, and this difference here gives you times also, and you can calculate it like that. How to determine this yellow point here? If you have two objects in the system which have different edges, and if the system is perfectly homogeneous for aluminum-26, the bulks of the two objects here, the bulk composition will derive from the initial composition of the solar system. And if you have two objects, you can test the consistency of the system and the isotopic homogeneity of magnesium and aluminum if the system behaves like that. So another way to see that, so this is the same diagram here at the top. We can also look to that in another diagram that we call not the isochrone diagram, but the evolution diagram, which shows exactly the same thing for these two objects in that case. Their magnesium isotopic composition, the y-axis here, and this is time, okay, in the x-axis, can be derived from the same initial composition. And then they would go to here, or they would go to here with time. So the slopes here are different because the slope in this diagram is the aluminum to magnesium ratio of the object. If the object is rich in aluminum, it will increase its magnesium isotopic composition faster than another one. If you have a situation like that, much more complex, when the bulk of these two objects do not lie on a single isochrone, then the interpretation is that these two objects derive from reservoirs which do not have the same edge. And the interpretation of that would be that the blue one has derived from the initial here, and that the red one has been made later, extracted later from a nebula which has already, a disk which has already evolved. So this is the game. And so the game we played with chondrules and CIs. And so this took a lot of time because you have to do high precision measurement at small scale. And these are isochrones in chondrules, okay? And so you see you can determine the slope and the intercept. And here the range of variation is below the per mil. So and you have to measure that at the level of a few microns. This is why it's complicated. So you can date chondrules like that. And you can play the same game with a lot of CIs. We did that. And I just show you in the next diagram, and we show you a diagram like that, an evolution diagram to test the homogeneity of the solar system. So the game we have played is to measure a lot of chondrules, a lot of CIs. We determine their bulk aluminum to magnesium ratio so that we can plot them in this diagram and back calculate their evolution to see if their evolution goes back to a common value. And this is the result. These are the results. Here you can see, so this is the same diagram. So these are the chondrules. They are going back to this line here, and these are different CIs, okay? So there are large errors. But when you go, you can define an initial here, which is more or less common to all these objects. And you can, so this validates, in fact, the use of aluminium-26 as a chronometer. And then from all the individual composition of this object, you can calculate the edge relative to this initial. If you do that, this is a systematic you find. And this is shown here. So it's probability distribution diagram, which show the distribution of edge for CI here and for chondrules here. There is some overlap. And the colors here correspond to the colors of the different stage of evolution of a young star as calibrated from the observation of thousands of young stellar objects. And in fact, you see that the CIs will be made during this class 1 of evolution of the young star, which lasts for very few time. And in fact, there is a consistency here because after 4 or 5 million years from the observation of young star, you don't have gas anymore in the disk. And so you cannot make chondrules, you cannot react them with the gas. And in fact, you see that the CIs and chondrules are really made during this very short period. And you see a very strong difference between CIs, which are made first, and chondrules, which are made after that, even though within chondrules, you can find precursor grains, relic grains, that you can date with their magnesium isotopic composition. So this is quite complicated, but it has been done in a few objects. And you can show in that case that the chondrules here are made by the melting or remelting of precursors which were formed much earlier in the disk. And the precursor of CIs are, of course, made very early. So there is a continuum between the two, but a clear difference in average between CIs and chondrules in their last melting age. So these chondrules are, so we have an answer on the edge. And now we are going to look to the origin of these chondrules and the way they interact with the gas in the disk. So this is a picture of a chondrule. You have, it's made of olivines, which are forsterite. Some of them are relict. Here in light gray, you see the glass, okay, so it has been melted and quenched. You have orthopyroxene, which are growing on the border. You have clinopyroxene crystallizing from the melt, and these minerals. Observation of many of them shows that they have been melted at various temperatures from their major composition, their texture. They have been quenched. They have been cooled at different rates. They contain relict minerals, so they are made by the melting of precursor dust. They have minerals which crystallize from the melt, and they have exchange with the gas. And specifically, because you can see in some chondrules, on the edge of the chondrule, you can see, for instance, even quartz, showing that in fact SiO, which is can be condensed at lower temperature. If you have high pressure of SiO in the gas around the chondrules, you will condense SiO and dissolve SiO into the chondrule melt to a point even that you can make stabilized quartz. The first thing you will do, as we will see in the next slide, is to transform olivine into pyroxene by adding SiO. But at the end, you can even make quartz. So the origin of this chondrule is not known. What is not known is the reason why they have been melted in the disk. And there are different models, which are shown here. So this is time, this is temperature, and this is different cooling histories, which are calculated by models depending on the type of process that you invoke to make chondrules. And so I will not go to all of them. But the one which is the probably the most popular at the time, and it's not a question of making a pool, okay, it's reasons for that, is the fact a shock wave propagating into the gas. And there are many reasons to make shock wave during the accretion of a star. And this shock wave, depending on the shock wave, will make an history which would be like that, okay? So you will, before the shock wave, the shock gets to the chondrule, the temperature is stable, and then it will heat very rapidly to a flash heating to up to 2000 K, and then it will cool at different rates. The cooling rate will depend, in fact, on the density of this object in the gas, because if they are close together, by cooling, they will heat the one around, and there are different cooling rates, in fact. And during such a process, of course, by flash heating at very high temperature, volatiles will be lost from the object, and even elements like magnesium will be lost by vaporization, because magnesium is more volatile than silicon, aluminum, calcium. So most chondrule, in fact, underwent this kind of evaporation. This can be explained, this can be shown here, okay? You can say, perhaps, that this object was made from an object like that. Here you have a lot of olivine in red, and if you flash heat this object, you will evaporate magnesium, so you will, because you evaporate magnesium from the liquids, then the olivine is not stable anymore in the composition, with the composition of this liquid, so the olivine will dissolve in the liquid, and you will continue to evaporate, to lose magnesium by evaporation, so the melt will become more and more blue and green, so more and more rich in calcium and aluminum, refractory calcium and aluminum. You will lose lot of the relict, the olivine crystals. Some of them will stay, and you will get such an object. When you do that, of course, we can track that, we can demonstrate that by looking to the magnesium isotopic composition, because the magnesium isotopic composition will be fractionated during this process. So this is what Zhengbing Deng has done here during his PhD. By developing the laser ablation system with the MC-ICP-MS here to try to measure precisely the magnesium isotopic composition in this object. So by ion probe we can measure easily the magnesium-26 excess, but we have a lot of difficulties for technical reason I will not explain, to measure precisely the 25 to 24 magnesium isotopic ratio, the variation of the stable isotope due to fractionation process. And so by laser ablation, we can measure the excess of magnesium-26 as well as with ion probe, so we can also determine the edge in an isochron diagram, but what we can do is to measure the 25 to 24 magnesium isotopic ratio. And here you see measurements in one chondrule versus the aluminum to magnesium ratio. The idea is that when the aluminum to magnesium ratio of the glass is high, it means that magnesium has been lost by evaporation. And in that case, we know the isotopic fractionation of magnesium by evaporation. And if we simulate what should be the change in the magnesium isotopic composition, it should go around this line here. And what we measure is not at all that. And this means, in fact, that we have another source of magnesium to the liquid. And the source of magnesium is the dissolution of olivine, which brings magnesium, which has not changed its isotopic composition, to the liquid. And we can model that, okay? And the idea is that we know the dissolution rate of olivine in a liquid. This has been determined experimentally. We can postulate the evaporation rate if we take some temperature histories for the different process which make the chondrule. And so we can model how the magnesium isotopic composition will change with time. This is an example. If we start from here, okay? You'll have two vectors. The blue one is the dissolution of olivine, which will bring back the composition towards the composition of olivine. And the green one is the fractionation due to evaporation of magnesium. And you can calculate that and model it for a dissolution rate of olivine, a function of composition of the liquid, and a thermal history during the process, for instance, shock heating. And this is an example. So the composition will go this way. And in this case, okay, it will stop here. And what we observe in chondrule is the very small range of variation, so this doesn't work. And in fact, the only history which works is a flash heating, due to a shock wave, a shock model with a slow heating around 1000 Kelvin per hour. So we can determine both the origin of chondrule by this kind of measurements and also prove the fact that the chondrule has exchanged with the gas. We can also prove that by looking to the oxygen isotopic composition. And so again, I don't want to make it complicated, so I try to make it the most simple as possible. So here, this is this 3 oxygen isotope diagram. So this is oxygen 1816, this is oxygen 1716. And we know that from measurements that the sun is here. We know from measurements of minerals altered with water in some chondrites that there was water ice, which was very to the top of the diagram, very much depleted in oxygen 16, compared to the sun, which is enriched in oxygen 16. The Earth is here, the chondrites are here. In this diagram, we move along a line of slope 0.5 if by normal mass fractionation processes. We don't know how we could move along a line of slope 1. There are some models for that, which postulate some mass-independent fractionation by, let's say, self-shielding of UV light by CO or these kind of things, but these are some hypotheses. And the other observation we have is that CIs and the condensate made from the gas are not on this line of slope 1, but are on this line of slope 0.94. The reason for that is not very well known. We don't really know why CIs, the refractory, the first condensate, are distributed on this line. We don't know what this process on line 1 would be, okay? For sure, there are some models. But these are the observation. And there is another observation which is even more strange, which is that for the chondrules, all the minerals in the chondrules, in fact, this is a blow-up of the same diagram, they distribute between these two lines, okay? They distribute in this region here. And they are line, okay, and they define another line. And there is this is very strange. And so this is, in fact, we propose that this is showing the interaction of the chondrule with the gas. And in fact, of course, if you lose magnesium by evaporation, you also lose oxygen by evaporation, and you exchange oxygen with the gas. And so we have shown that you can reproduce that in a model where this is the same diagram. You start from here. This is the precursor dust from which you make the chondrule. Part of it is vaporized. So if it is vaporized, its oxygen is released to the gas. This oxygen will mix with the oxygen in the gas, and so will mix along this line, this dashed line here. Depending on the ratio of dust to gas, this will dictate the oxygen isotopic composition of the result of the mixing. So for instance, here it will stop here. And then from this gas, we have in this gas, depending on the redox, we have CO, SiO. We know their oxygen isotopic composition in function of temperature, so we can calculate where CO would be and SiO would be for a bulk gas, which is here. Marc Javoin and Etienne Ballon have calculated the oxygen isotopic fractionation between SiO gas and SiO component in pyroxene in liquid, so this would be here. So if you take the SiO gas and you interact with the chondrule melt, so you will dissolve again SiO into this chondrule melt. The pyroxene component, the SiO component in the melt will have this composition. And if you react this SiO with an olivine which is dissolving by mass balance, we'll have 2/3 of oxygen coming from olivine, 1/3 coming from here, and you will make a pyroxene which is here in composition. And if you vary all the parameters here, you can show that all the mineral crystallized in the chondrule will go along such a line here. And if you model that, okay, you find, so these are varying the redox, the dust-gas ratios, the temperature, and so on, so you produce this. And you model a line here, which is the same as the line which is observed, meaning that this works and could explain what we see. So the oxygen also, the oxygen and the magnesium, they both show that the chondrule have interacted with the gas of the nebula. So if I sum up this observation, we see that we formed the CIs very early, and their precursor also, during the first 100,000 years. And this is very strange, in fact, because when you sink to an accretion disk, you have in this disk high temperature, high enough to condensate refractory components for much longer time. So there is no reason for CIs to be made only during the first 50 or 100,000 years. And this is a major question. And also a major question would be how all these solids, which are formed at different times, at different places, at different temperatures and so on, have got different thermal histories, at the end will finish together in a chondrite, and how their mixing will make a chondritic, a solar composition. So this is the last part of the talk. So to try to understand that, this is where we begin to to look to the astrophysics. And so Francesco and Sebastian are in the room, and they can answer better than me to all questions. And so you have, I've drawn here this schematic view of the forming sun, okay? And so at the beginning, you have the molecular cloud which collapses, so, and is building directly at the center of mass of it a star, a sun, which is beginning to form. And with time, material in the infalling cloud will come from longer distances, and will reach the sun and the disk around it at different distance. So this is the disk here, which is made because of dissipation of conservation of angular momentum. There is some rotation movement in the presolar cloud. So when the material is infalling, you have to conserve angular momentum. The disk, part of the material is going to the sun, part of the material will form a disk here. We call the centrifugal radius the distance in the disk which limits the zone where the material is fed to the disk by the infall of the collapse of the cloud. In the disk, there is viscous dissipation in this disk. Okay, so this disk in the model, we consider that we use alpha, what is called alpha disk models. So alpha is the way to give a number to turbulence. This disk must have some turbulence inside to be able to dissipate some energy, to distribute angular momentum, to make that angular momentum can be lost to the outer region of the disk, so that the disk is an accretion disk and material can flow towards the center. So this turbulence is described by a parameter which is called alpha. This turbulence is coming from magnetorotational instabilities because part of this gas is ionized by the light, the UV light coming from the star, and of course there is some fossil magnetic field in the presolar cloud, and there are magnetic field due to the imposed by the forming star. And so this makes that there is the ionized particles are submitted to this field, and there are these magnetorotational instabilities which create some turbulence in the disk. This turbulence prevents accretion or collapse of material, prevents counteract gravity when it is present. But it is only present in the inner region of the disk and at the surface of the disk, because inside the disk, the concentration of gas and dust makes that the disk is opaque and light cannot enter, and so the light cannot ionize material. And the model, the calculation, also take that into account and predict the formation of what is called dead zone, so region in the disk where there is no turbulence, and so where gravity can play and material can accumulate, giving rise to high concentration, to gravitational instabilities, so the formation of small planets, planetesimal, or the formation of a large amount of material which will make some burst in accretion directly towards the sun. And the models also takes into account, of course, calculate due to viscous heating, the balance between viscous heating and heating by the light from the sun, the temperature profile in the disk. The dissipation, the viscous dissipation of the disk, we can consider there is a point which we call turnover radius in the disk, which is the limit between where the material will flow towards the star and material will be dissipated towards the outer disk. With time, of course, material is coming from more and bigger distance from the presolar cloud, so they will reach the disk at bigger and bigger distance. So this centrifugal radius will move from the inside to the outside, and the turnover radius will also move, but at a different rate. At the end of the accretion, around 2,000, 3,100 years, this turnover radius will be very far, and the disk will be fully an accretion disk. All the material coming to the disk will come to the disk and go to the star. So we have that, okay, and we can use thermodynamics. So in the simulation, which are 1D simulation, so we solve differential equation describing all this, and in which are included some basic thermodynamics to predict how minerals will be evaporated. For instance, a mineral in the presolar cloud, depending whether it's a refractory silicate or something else, we know where it will reach the disk and at what temperature it will be. And so we can calculate whether it will be vaporized and go to the gas, or whether it will be not vaporized, it will be processed, or it will be simply protected and kept in the disk and moved in the disk. And we can as well calculate when this gas here dissipate in the disk, how it will cool, and what minerals it will condensate. So we can simulate with no free parameter. The only free parameter is the angular momentum of the pre-solar cloud, and nothing else, in fact, is fixed. And then it is calculated from the physics and the thermodynamics. So this is the example of some simulation. So this is just starting. Okay, I'm going to show you something which has been made last week. So that Francesco did last week with Sebastian. So this is an example of some calculation. So this is time, 10,000 years, 100,000 years. This is the mass of CIs which are formed in solar mass, okay? And this is the accretion rate, so the derivative of the mass with time. So this is the rate of accretion of the star. So 5e minus 6 means that you will, after 1 million years, you will reach 5 solar mass, which is of course too high because the sun is 1 solar mass by definition. But this is of course due to the fact that the accretion rate is decreasing very fast at the beginning, and so the star here at 100,000 years is not, the sun has not got at all its mass, and the accretion rate is decreasing. At the end, in 5 million years, the sun has 1 solar mass. What you see here is that the models calculate and find some burst in accretion due to the fact that you have dead zones which are building in the disk, and so making some gravitational instabilities, and then you have some burst in the accretion rate here. Here you have the rate of formation, the amount of CIs which are formed by condensation of the gas at high temperature. And you see that when there is some burst of accretion from a dead zone where CIs were accumulating, part of the CIs are driven to the sun and so are lost from the disk. So this is why it decreases, and you have this burst here. And this is the production of CIs. So this is calculated. If I plot this, so this is a log unit. If I plot that in this diagram, which I have shown before, this is what it gives, okay? And it predicts exactly, more or less, what we measure in CIs. And it explains why CIs are made during the first 50,000 years, and the reason of that is, what is the reason of that? The reason of that is that there is only a very short period within which refractory grains carrying calcium and aluminium from the pre-solar gas can reach the disk at a temperature at which they will be vaporized to make a gas of solar composition containing calcium and aluminium, and a period during which this gas will dissipate and condense some refractory silicates which will be over the turnover radius here and will not be accreted to the star. And in fact, it's very easy to understand. It is predicted by the model, and this explains why CIs have this edge. And to finish, just to show you, so this is really progressing now, so we are very excited by that. Okay, it's like a Pandora box that you open. We are developing a tool that we can use to simulate many things in the disk. And this is, for instance, another kind of calculation. We can track the formation of the different kind of solids. So here, this is the mass fraction of these solids in the disk versus the distance in the disk in astronomical units. So 1 is the distance to the Earth. This is after 200,000 years in the disk, so the end of this first phase of viscous dissipation of the disk. And this is, for instance, the distribution of CIs in the disk. So there are CIs in the inner region, there are no CIs here, and there are CIs here in the outer regions. We can calculate how much iron dust condensed from the gas is there. We can calculate how much silicate dust condensed is there, how much silicate dust, which is pre-solar, has been processed, so for instance, recrystallized, and is in the disk. And then, of course, then if we begin to put some numbers here, okay, we can put some chemical composition to all this dust. We can sum up all this composition, and we can calculate what is the chemical composition of this region in the disk. And if we play this game here, we have CI composition. Here we have unstatite chondrite composition, for instance, or close to it. We can put isotopes, we can put aluminium-26, we can put everything, and we can simulate what's going on. We can try to see if we can reproduce exactly what we see in this meteorite. So as a conclusion, what we are doing in this project is we are beginning to bridge, in fact, the gap between observation and models. So I've just shown you one example. We can explain, in fact, directly. This is the first direct result, the edge distribution of sea ice. We can simulate the composition of the gas. So by the interplay of this different process in the physics of the building of the disk. And we can model the formation, the transformation, preservation, transport of these solids. And of course, we are excited. We are on the track for explaining, we hope, many, many things. So I've put some dots here. I hope we can explain many things. But of course, the chemical composition of chondrite, the so-called complementarity between chondrules and matrix. Why? A chondrite, as I have shown here, as is here, okay, has in bulk the chemical composition of the sun, close to it, but not the oxygen isotopic composition. So of course, it is made by components which have undergone a lot of reaction in the disk. But at the end, they have something which is close in chemical composition from the sun. We can calculate that, okay? Here we have processed grain, so they have exchanged our oxygen and magnesium isotopes, but at the end they have some composition, and we can see that at some position they have the composition close to the sun. And the model predict, for instance, I have shown you the existence of dead zone, of gravitational instabilities. It calculates some shock waves, so perhaps we can even go to study the formation of chondrules and simulate their distribution in edge. We can play with the oxygen isotope composition, the aluminum-26, and many other things. This is it. Thank you.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Question, Marc.
Non, il n'a pas le droit.
J'ai deux remarques à faire. D'abord, peut-être une question. Alors, les deux remarques, c'est la suivante. Vous êtes trop modeste. Parce que sur la composition isotopique du Soleil, vous ne pourriez peut-être pas le mentionner vous-même, mais moi je le fais, hein, c'est que vous aviez prédit cette composition isotopique du Soleil avec Ashizume, c'est vrai.
Oui.
Voilà. Bon. Et à l'époque, on vous avait dit que c'était ridicule, ou du moins certains vous l'avaient dit.
Stupide ou ridicule.
Oui, stupide, voilà, très bien. Bon, donc on joue dans la même équipe, voilà. Donc, la deuxième chose, c'est à propos de la contribution des CI dans la composition du Soleil. Alors, il y a deux problèmes qui concernent l'oxygène. Le premier, c'est que la composition de l'oxygène solaire, enfin, je veux dire, la concentration de l'oxygène solaire, c'est probablement celle qui est le moins bien connue, enfin, du moins une des moins bien connues. Oui. Elle varie sans arrêt. Il y a eu récemment, enfin assez récemment, une mise au point de, je ne me souviens plus de son nom, mais
Asplund.
Oui. Ah non, il y en a une avant. Bon, ouais. Mais non, de l'Observatoire de Paris. Hein.
Ah oui, non, c'est pas le même.
Oui, c'est une dame, mais je me souviens plus de son nom. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose qui varie. Et la question qu'on peut se poser aussi, c'est ça. C'est que d'après le papier de Lauders, par exemple, en 2010, vous vous rendez compte que la contribution des CI, ça fait la moitié de l'oxygène solaire. C'est quand même beaucoup. On est passé d'un tiers ou d'un quart à la moitié. Hein. Et la question qu'on peut se poser, c'est quelle était la concentration en eau de la poussière qui, enfin, si c'était de la CI, a effectivement contribué à la formation du Soleil. Oui. En définitive, est-ce qu'elle était sèche ou est-ce qu'elle était humide? Voilà. Donc ça, c'est les deux remarques.
Je ne sais pas répondre à ça. Hein.
Comment?
Je ne sais pas répondre à ça. Je peux dire comme une boutade qu'on n'a pas forcément fait le Soleil avec des chondrites, mais on l'a fait avec de la poussière.
Oui. Non, mais c'est un problème, c'est un problème important.
Ouais.
Donc la première question, c'est peut-être pas forcément à vous, mais à Sébastien. Quelle est la relation entre l'échelle de temps de votre papier là et celle du papier de 2015? Il est là ou il est parti? Sébastien.
Il est parti. Il est là?
Le papier Baillet et al. 2015. Oui, mais le zéro, est-ce que le zéro est le même ou pas?
Le zéro, c'est pas sûr en fait, parce que dans ce dont on présente les marques, le zéro, c'est le début de l'effondrement nucléaire moléculaire. Alors que dans le papier, le référence, le zéro, c'est le moment où le protoplanétaire est déjà assemblé. Et donc il peut s'écouler plusieurs dizaines à une centaine de milliers d'années.
Pas plus. D'accord. Bon, et puis la dernière. Hein, oui, ça me vient comme ça. Est-ce que c'est évident? Comment?
Qu'est-ce que tu dis? Plus fort.
Non. Alors là, c'est une question.
Non, il a le droit de répondre.
C'est une question à tout le monde.
Oui.
Est-ce qu'il y a une relation entre la position de Mercure et son contenu en fer?
Il y a il y a une relation si on regarde la loi de Tithus-Bode, ces choses-là, mais ça, c'est des généralités. Mais non. Je comprends. La question, c'est quoi? C'est pourquoi est-ce que Mercure... Oui, il y a une relation, mais... Oui, mais c'est pas ça qui explique sans doute son enrichissement en fer. Si on imagine que, je sais pas, il y a une collision qui a enlevé un manteau silicaté, il y a un enrichissement en fer, donc effectivement, on pourrait dire qu'ici, dans les zones internes, il y a un enrichissement en fer. Donc, mais encore une fois, c'est une observation qu'il ne faut pas interpréter au premier ordre, parce qu'on peut très bien imaginer que Mercure avait une composition comme la Terre et a perdu son manteau silicaté à la suite d'une collision géante, qui fasse que maintenant il est très riche en fer.
Non, je parlais du processus d'accrétion.
Ah oui.
Merci Marc. D'autres questions, commentaires? Oui.
Yes, and the aluminium magnesium isotope system is a very simple and robust tool to date the first solids in the first 5 years in the solar system. But recently, some studies suspect its validity. So, Mark, and what do you think of this problem? And will you use more aluminium magnesium to date chondrules in the future?
No, of course. So I didn't show that, but this is the reason of Jan Blickerthoff in the project. Okay, so we are doing at the same time uranium-lead dating. So there is a controversy between aluminium-26 dating and uranium-lead dating in chondrules. So uranium-lead dating seems to show that chondrules are older than what we see with aluminium-26. Then I'm not totally convinced of that. So the question is to see which of the two chronometers is wrong. Probably the two of them are correct, but they are not dating exactly the same thing. So, and we are trying to try to find what you really date with uranium lead. And in fact, the question is what are the phases which carry the uranium in a chondrule? So there are refractory phases. And with aluminium-26, for sure, we know that we are dating the glass, so the formation of the quench of the glass, because we make spots in the glass and in the silicates, so we are dating the last melting event. With the uranium-lead, it's not so clear. So, for instance, by looking to something that Jan has done very recently, is that even if in classical 206, 207 diagram for lead, you can find an edge which is very old. Then if you look to the lead 208, and the lead 208 to lead 206 will give you the thorium-uranium ratio, not the edge by the 2.6 to 7 lead ratio. When you look to that, you find that this ratio is very high, so even higher than 4, 5, or 6, which makes that it is very refractory. So it is possible that in some chondrules with the uranium-lead, you date refractory phase, relict CI fragments which are in chondrules, and in that case you would find very old edges. So this is a possibility, but it is a question. Okay.
More questions? Comments? Yeah.
From that?
From this slide to the next.
So here, in fact, this slide, I showed it in this slide, okay, but I could have, this slide is a way to look to the data, but the other way is this one, okay? So this slide has its counterpart, which is this one, which would be an isochrone for each of these points. So for each of these points, this is an evolution diagram showing how the initial composition, so the intercept, will change with time, okay? The intercept is related to the edge, okay? The intercept is related to the edge. But the slope also is related to the edge. So the slope of the isochrone is also giving you the edge. So for each CI, we made an isochrone. From this isochrone, we can determine the intercept. We can plot the intercept in this evolution diagram. Here, I have shown the evolution diagram, but for each of these points, I have an isochrone. So I have an aluminum 26-27 ratio, so I have an edge. So for each of these points, I have an edge with an error. So I represent this error, this edge, as a Gaussian curve, with the 2 sigma being the error. And then you sum all this Gaussian curve to make a probability distribution, which gives you the average edge of all these objects. This is the way it is constructed. No? Exactly on that one, 15 from me, 11 from literature. This is all what exists.
Oui.
Just a naive question. All these observations come from our solar system, or we can totally generalize to star formation generally, or there is maybe in the literature some other stars formation observation that are radically different.
All the observation, if I understand well the question, all the observation we have of young stellar objects are from our galaxy and from clouds which are close to us, okay, or Orion or other ones, okay. So, but you know there are more than thousands of them now, so there are some general laws, and so this diagram here is really the result of observation of hundreds and hundreds of objects, okay, which can all be classified like that. So. They look like that, okay, depending on their evolution. And the meteorites, all the meteorites we know come from the solar system. There is no grain we have in of course, except the presolar grains, okay, which are, but this is a presolar grain, okay, this one. So this is not. If you look to this is silicon carbide. If you look to the silicon and carbon isotopic composition, it is not made of 2 isotopes of carbon, only of one, okay? And silicon, it has only also, over the 3 silicon isotopes, it has a very strange composition. The only way to understand this sample is to consider that it has condensed in a gas where there was, let's say, only carbon-13 and no carbon-12, where this takes place in the zone in a star where you produce by fusion carbon-13. So this grain has condensed in a star. And then the star has exploded, and this grain has been put in the interstellar medium. It was part of the dust, which was in the presolar molecular cloud from which the solar system was made. But of course, these are, the concentration is ppm, ppb in meteorites. These are very difficult to find, and this is not at all governing the major, the composition, major element composition. This is a detail in some way, but it's a detail which is important. All the physics of the stellar models now are calibrated by these grains. Because in this grain you find, for instance, a specific composition of carbon isotopes, nitrogen isotopes, silicon isotopes, and then if you put that together, it is only it calibrates even the production rate, the nuclear reaction rates in stars to make this isotopic composition.
Sur ton avant-dernier slide, tu parles des grains qui ne sont pas processés, là.
Ouais.
Est-ce que ça concerne que le noyau des grains, la partie silicatée ou je ne sais quoi, ou est-ce que ça concerne aussi la coque de glace qu'il pourrait y avoir autour?
Francesco et Sébastien sont un peu trop feignants, donc ils n'ont pas regardé ce détail-là. Non,
mais ça, on savait déjà qu'ils étaient feignants, mais toi, tu es moins feignant.
Mais non, évidemment, on n'est pas rentré dans ce niveau de détail. Là, par exemple, on a mis des prescriptions qui sont très simples, du genre, on a mis pour un silicate 900 degrés, s'il est chauffé au-dessus de 900 degrés ou pas. Parce que on a mis ça parce qu'on a fait des choses simples, mais ce sont déjà très compliquées. Hein. Mais parce qu'il y a des raisons pour ça. Par exemple, dans les météorites, on connaît ces gems. Donc ça, c'est des silicates présolaires qui sont amorphes. Donc ils ont été amorphisés par le rayonnement cosmique galactique dans le milieu interstellaire. Si on prend un minéral comme ça, la composition d'olivine, on le chauffe un tout petit peu à 500-600 degrés, immédiatement il va recristalliser. Donc dans les étoiles jeunes en formation, dans les disques, les astrophysiciens mesurent avec des résolutions qui sont de l'ordre de 0,5 unités astronomiques le rapport pyroxène-olivine, le rapport de silicate amorphe sur olivine cristallisée, et ainsi de suite. Et donc on voit comment ça change en fonction de la distance au centre de l'étoile. Donc en fait, on est capable de revenir à une histoire thermique qu'a subi ces grains. Donc un grain comme ça, si pour le préserver à la fin, il faut qu'il soit injecté là, hein, à la fin, quand le disque centrifuge a bougé jusqu'au bout, hein, et qu'il soit injecté dans une zone qui est déjà froide, pour qu'il ne soit pas chauffé et qu'il soit préservé. Et comme ça, on peut l'expliquer. Et c'est ce qui est en quelle couleur, je ne sais plus, voilà, le bleu clair, celui-là par exemple. Oui, c'est ça, oui. 100, 200 Kelvin. Là, dans notre prescription, c'est en dessous de 900, mais on peut tout faire. On a la glace, on peut calculer la glace. Quand est-ce que c'est un peu la question de Marc Javois. La glace qui est dans le milieu interstellaire, alors c'est compliqué dans le milieu interstellaire, hein, la part de l'oxygène qui est sous forme de gaz avec le CO ou celui qui est sous forme de glace solide. Mais on peut calculer avec ça quelles sont les conditions, quelle est la fraction de glace qui est injectée dans le disque à des températures en dessous de 100 K ou 150 K. À ces pressions-là, 10-4, la glace est solide et est préservée sous forme de glace. Alors c'est pour ça qu'à la fin, j'ai dit qu'on va essayer de comprendre les isotopes de l'oxygène, parce que si on l'injecte comme ça, elle garde sa composition isotopique. À ce moment-là, ça veut dire que pour les isotopes de l'oxygène, pour faire ça, si l'eau qu'on mesure, elle a cette composition, mais qu'elle est héritée du milieu interstellaire, le processus qui fabrique ça, c'est pas un processus qui se passe dans le système solaire, mais c'est un processus qui se passe avant. Alors peut-être que c'est pas le cas, mais à partir du moment où on a ça, on peut vraiment, avec ça, se mettre à faire des suppositions. Là, on n'a rien fait, hein, c'est juste la physique, on n'a rien mis. On a juste dit que la composition moyenne chimique du mélange de gaz et de poussière au départ, c'était la composition solaire, puisque le Soleil à la fin a la composition solaire, donc il faut quand même respecter ça. Et juste un moment angulaire au départ, et après ça calcule. Donc avec ce qu'on sait de la physique, voilà. Mais dedans, on peut se mettre à mettre des compositions isotopiques, on peut se mettre à dire que c'est constitué, que dedans il y a des grains, que la glace a telle composition, que les silicates ont telle composition au départ. Mais comme on sait ici ceux qui sont processés, ceux qui ne le sont pas, on va pouvoir calculer comment ils échangent leur composition isotopique, comment ils modifient la composition isotopique gaz, et ça va modifier la composition de ce qui est condensé, tout ça, on le met dedans. Et on va pouvoir le prédire.
Bien. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions, commentaires? Sinon, nous allons remercier Marc encore une fois. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.